The notification came through while I was still in my scrubs, sitting in my car in the hospital parking garage, too tired to drive but too wired to go home. Level 4. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights humming overhead. I had eaten half a granola bar for lunch and forgotten about it. My feet ached in the specific way that only comes after 12 hours on a cardiac floor, the kind of ache that settles into your bones and doesn't ask permission. My phone buzzed once. Then again, someone I didn't recognize had tagged my brother in a comment on the hospital's official Instagram page. The caption read, "Congratulations to this year's recipients of the Regional Excellence in Nursing Award." There was a photo. I was in it, standing at the front of a conference room in my dress scrubs, holding a framed certificate, smiling in the careful way you smile when you know a camera is pointed at you. My brother hadn't been there to take that picture. Neither had my father. Neither had my mother. They had been at my nephew's travel soccer game 2 hours away. It had been on the calendar for months, my brother reminded me, as if I had scheduled the award ceremony to inconvenience him. My name is Maya Reyes. I have been a registered nurse in the cardiac intensive care unit for 9 years. That sentence used to feel like something I needed to defend. It doesn't anymore. The email had arrived 6 weeks earlier, on a Tuesday morning between a 12-hour overnight and a scheduled deposition with the ethics committee about a patient care protocol I had helped rewrite. The subject line was formal: Regional Nursing Excellence Award Nomination Confirmation. I read it twice before I believed it. My unit director had submitted the nomination without telling me. That was how she operated. She didn't ask. She watched, she documented, and then she acted. I had learned more about advocacy from her than from anyone else in my career. The award was given annually by our Regional Hospital Coalition to recognize nurses across the district who had demonstrated sustained clinical impact, contributed to patient outcomes in measurable ways, and shown leadership within their units. There was a formal ceremony. Colleagues attended. Families were invited. The event would be covered by the hospital's communications team and posted across all their platforms. I sat with the email for a long time, not because I was processing the honor, though that was part of it. I was processing what it would mean to invite my family. We had a group chat, my brother Daniel at the top, my mother's name below his, then my father's, then my aunt, who had been added by mistake 3 years ago and no one had the heart to remove. The last message in the thread was from my mother. A photo of my nephew in his uniform, cleats muddy, grinning at the camera. 15 thumbs-up reactions from relatives I hadn't spoken to since the holidays. I typed slowly. I've been nominated for a Regional Nursing Award. The ceremony is on March 14th at the Convention Center downtown. Families are invited, and I would really love it if you could come. I reread it. Straightforward. No apology for asking. I hit send. My brother replied within 2 minutes. He always did. What kind of award? I wrote back. Excellence in Nursing. Regional Coalition. It's for clinical impact and unit leadership. He replied. Is it like a hospital thing? Or actually regional? I wrote, it's regional. 15 hospitals across the district. He sent back a thumbs up. Then, a minute later, we might have Daniel Jr. Game that weekend. Let me check. I watched the screen. 3 dots appeared under my mother's name, then disappeared. My father didn't respond at all. My aunt sent a heart emoji. I was not sure she knew what the message said. 2 days later, my brother confirmed the game conflict. He said it the way he always said things that were inconvenient, in a tone that was careful and neutral and slightly apologetic but not actually sorry. The way you apologize for weather. It's just been on the calendar. You know how the travel league is. He added that he was sure there would be other awards. My mother called that evening. I let it go to voicemail because I was finishing charting. She left a short message. She said she was proud of me and that she hoped the hospital appreciated how hard I worked. Then she said it was a shame about the game. She said it the way she said most things, gently, in a voice shaped entirely around not taking sides. My father sent a text 2 days after that. It read, "Congrats. We'll try to make it work." He didn't follow up. I had heard that before. I knew what it meant. There is a specific kind of grief that comes with being the child in a family who chose a profession no one else can categorize neatly. My brother Daniel was the kind of success story that required no context. He managed a regional logistics company. The title was clean. The income was visible. The impact was legible to anyone who heard it. At family dinners, my father could explain what Daniel did in 2 sentences and watch other people nod. When someone asked about me, the explanation stuttered. She's a nurse. In the ICU, with hearts, cardiac, the floor where the serious cases go. A pause. She's been there a long time. Nursing, in my family's accounting, was a job you had before you became a doctor, or before you got married, or before you figured out what you actually wanted. It was not a destination. It was a hallway. My father had never said that directly. He said it indirectly, the way people say things they believe, but know better than to voice out loud. The first time I understood that clearly I was 23, 2 months into my first nursing position on a general medical floor, calling home on a Sunday to say I had passed my first competency review with the highest marks in my cohort. My father said, "Are you still thinking about going back for your no problem?" As if the only value in what I had just done was whether it could become something else. I stopped calling to report things after that. It wasn't a decision I made consciously. It was more like a door that I kept closing until one day I noticed it had stayed closed. Growing up, Daniel had been the louder one. Not louder in the sense of noise, but louder in the sense of presence. He filled rooms differently. He played varsity baseball. He knew how to tell stories at dinner that made my father lean back in his chair and laugh. He got into the university my father had gone to, which meant something I was never quite sure how to measure. I was the reader, the one who stayed late in the library, the one who asked the teacher questions after class that other kids found strange. I cried at the end of sad movies and wrote papers for fun, and spent a summer volunteering at a free clinic at 16 because something in me had already started pointing in that direction before I had words for it. When I told my parents I wanted to be a nurse, my mother said she thought I had the heart for it. My father said I should also consider medical school. My brother said nothing, but later, at dinner, he told a story about a nurse he'd seen in an airport who couldn't figure out how to use the self-checkout kiosk, and everyone laughed. I don't think he meant it as commentary. I think it was just a story. But the table received it as one thing and I received it as another. I went to nursing school anyway. I graduated in the top 5% of my class. I chose cardiac because it was the hardest floor I could find, the one where the margin for error was thinnest and the decisions moved fastest. I liked that. I liked knowing that my competence had direct, measurable consequences for another person's life. At home, this translated to, she works long hours, and the patients like her. I stopped explaining years ago, not because I gave up, but because explanation started to feel like begging, and at some point, begging stops being worth the energy. The morning of the award ceremony arrived quietly, the way important days often do. No sense of ceremony in the air, no feeling that anything was different. My alarm went off at 6. I made coffee. I pressed my dress scrubs the night before and hung them on the back of my bathroom door. I did my hair carefully, not out of vanity, but out of respect. For the occasion, for myself, for the 9 years that had led to this particular morning, I drove to the convention center alone. The sky was flat and pale gray, the kind of sky that doesn't make promises. I found parking on the 2nd level and sat in the car for a moment before going in, hands on the wheel, looking at nothing in particular. The seat beside me was empty. No one had filled it last minute. No voice had called to say they'd found a way. The chat had stayed quiet since my brother's message about the game. I got out of the car and went inside. The convention hall had been arranged for the event with the kind of institutional elegance that hospitals do well, not lavish, but precise. Round tables with white linens, name placards, a podium at the front flanked by the coalition's banner and the flags of the participating hospital systems. The room smelled like hotel coffee and fresh flowers, and the particular neutrality of air conditioning in a space that had been set up carefully for an occasion. Other nurses arrived with their people, spouses adjusting ties, parents holding programs like they were precious documents, children fidgeting with the centerpieces until someone redirected them. I noticed all of it because noticing was something I had trained into habit over 9 years of watching people in rooms where things mattered. I found my table and sat down. The chair beside me was empty. No one at the table commented on it. The colleague to my left, a nurse from a pediatric unit 2 hospitals over, smiled at me and introduced herself. We talked about the morning commute and the parking situation and the coffee, which was better than expected. Normal conversation. The kind that asks nothing of you, The ceremony moved with the organized efficiency of people who had done this before. Opening remarks from the coalition chair. Recognition of the participating systems. A brief overview of the nomination criteria that made the room nod in collective understanding of what this process required. Then, the individual awards, one by one, each name called with its accompanying citation read aloud. When they called my name, I stood and walked to the stage. The citation mentioned 9 years of service. It mentioned the protocol revision I had led that reduced catheter-associated infection rates by 31% across my unit. It mentioned the mentorship program I had started for new graduate nurses, most of whom had never worked a critical care floor before, and arrived terrified in ways that were understandable and invisible to everyone but the nurses beside them. The coalition chair handed me the award. A framed certificate and a small engraved medallion on a navy ribbon. The weight of it was reassuring. Not symbolic. There was applause. Not thunderous. Not performative. The kind that comes from a room full of people who understand what the citation actually means. I shook hands. I smiled. I walked back to my table. My heart was steady. My hands were not shaking. I felt complete in the specific, quiet way that comes when something you have carried alone for a long time is finally placed somewhere it can be seen. Afterward, my colleague from the pediatric unit asked if my family had come. I said they had a prior commitment. She nodded in a way that told me she understood more than she was saying. We exchanged numbers. We said we should grab coffee. I meant it. I left before the room emptied. The parking garage was cooler than the hall. I sat in my car again, a ward resting on the passenger seat, the ribbon catching the overhead light. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. There is a difference between the two that I hadn't understood until that afternoon. The hospital's communications team had been at the ceremony with cameras. They always were. By that evening, the official recap post had gone live on the hospital Instagram, the Facebook page, and the internal employee newsletter. Standard practice. Multiple tagged accounts. Multiple shares from colleagues who had been there and colleagues who hadn't. I didn't post it myself. I shared nothing. I went home, made soup, watched something forgettable on television, and went to bed at a reasonable hour for the first time in weeks. I was on shift the following afternoon when my phone buzzed during a charting break. The notification was from Instagram. A comment on the hospital's post, from someone I didn't know well. A former nursing school classmate who had gone into hospital administration and apparently knew my brother through a professional network somewhere. The comment read, "Wait, is this Maya Reyes from St. Catherine's, Daniel's sister? She's incredible." Someone had replied beneath it with a tag. My brother's handle. The kind of casual, well-meaning tag that happens between people who know each other and assume familiarity. No malice in it, just recognition. I imagine it arrived on his phone during halftime. The soccer field, the folding chairs, the cooler of water bottles and orange slices. My brother scrolling through notifications the way people do when they have a moment between things. And then a pause. A longer look. The caption reading aloud in his head. The citation excerpted in the post. 31% reduction. Protocol revision. Mentorship program. 9 years. Regional coalition. I imagine my mother leaning over. I imagine my father putting down his coffee. I don't know what they said to each other. I wasn't there. But that evening, the messages came. My mother texted first. "Why didn't you tell us it was this big of a deal?" I stared at the screen. Then I typed, "I told you what it was. I sent the details to the group chat 6 weeks ago." She replied, "You said nursing award. I didn't realize it was regional." I waited. 3 dots appeared. A second message. "Your father wants to talk." My father didn't call. He texted. It was the longest text he had sent me in years. It said, "Daniel showed me the post. The hospital shared your citation." I didn't understand what the protocol work meant. I should have asked more questions before assuming. I read it 3 times, not because it was confusing, but because I wanted to be sure I was reading it correctly. He hadn't said, "I'm sorry." He hadn't said I was wrong, but he had said I should have asked. For my father, that was the closest thing to a rewrite that he knew how to offer. I replied, "Thank you for reading it." He wrote back, "Can I call this week?" I said, "Then my brother." His message came later that night, after the game, after the drive home, after the kids were presumably in bed. It was brief, and it was his. He said, "I looked up the coalition. That's a real thing. 15 hospitals. I didn't know that's what you were nominated for. You should have made me understand. That last sentence landed differently than he intended it. You should have made me understand. As if the responsibility for his comprehension had always been mine. As if the 9 years of working that floor, the nights I had called him and been given 2 minutes before he had to take another call, the promotions I had stopped mentioning because the conversation always drifted, as if all of that was a failure of translation on my part. I thought about responding to that line directly. I decided against it, not because I was avoiding conflict, but because I recognized that arguing about the past was its own kind of drawer, the kind you could keep opening for years and never find anything different inside. I wrote back, "I appreciate you saying that. I'll talk to you soon." Daniel didn't reply that night. But the next morning, before I left for an early shift, there was one more message from him. It said, "I'm proud of you. I don't think I say that enough." I read it in my car before starting the engine. I sat with it. I didn't cry, which surprised me a little. I had imagined, in the years I had spent not waiting for those words, that receiving them might undo something in me. It didn't. It was quieter than that. It felt like a room that had been airless for a long time, finally having a window opened. Not transformed, just different in a small and real way. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm I hadn't anticipated. My mother called more. Not dramatically more, but consistently, in a way that felt less like checking in and more like actually wanting to know. She asked about my patients, in the way I had always wished she would, not asking for names or details, but asking about the work itself, about what the days were like, about what happened in the unit when things went well, and what happened when they didn't. She said once, "I think I thought nursing was something you did until you found your direction." I didn't understand that it was the direction. That sentence sat in me for days, not because it was painful to hear so late, but because it was honest, in a way she had rarely been with me before. My mother moved through the world in smooth surfaces. She believed in keeping things even. For her to say I didn't understand was a kind of admission I hadn't expected. My father called on a Thursday evening. We talked for 45 minutes. He asked about the protocol revision, specifically what the problem had been and how the change worked. He listened in the way he listened to things that interested him, with follow-up questions, without changing the subject. At the end of the call, he said he had forwarded the hospital's Instagram post to his colleague from work. He said it the way he said things that mattered to him, but that he wasn't ready to be fully vulnerable about. He didn't frame it as pride. He framed it as information. That was how he operated. I had learned years ago not to wait for his language to match his meaning. My brother and I talked twice more in the following month. The conversations were different. Not warmer exactly, but more precise. He asked real questions. He stopped steering toward his own news after the first few minutes. Once, he said, "I think I made a lot of assumptions about your job because I didn't ask enough questions early on." I kept that. My sister-in-law texted separately. She said she had always known my work was significant and that she hoped the award brought some deserved visibility. I appreciated her for saying it. She had been watching quietly for years. I had not given her enough credit for that. There was no single moment of transformation. No dramatic scene at a kitchen table where everyone said what they should have said years ago. Families don't work that way, or at least mine didn't. What happened was more like a gradual reorientation, the way a plant slowly turns toward light without any one moment of turning. I kept going to work. I kept standing at the bedside of people whose hearts were failing, whose families were frightened, whose bodies were doing the difficult and uncertain work of trying to stay alive. I kept making decisions at 3 a.m. that no one outside that floor would ever fully understand. I kept mentoring the new graduate nurses who arrived terrified and quiet, who reminded me of who I had been, who needed someone to tell them that quiet was not the same as invisible. One afternoon, a nurse I had been mentoring for 8 months came to find me after a difficult shift. A patient had coded. The team had done everything right. The outcome had still been devastating. She was holding herself together in the way you hold yourself together when you're new enough that grief still feels like failure. I sat with her in the break room. I told her what I wished someone had told me when I was 8 months in, that the distance between doing everything right and a good outcome is sometimes very wide, and that learning to live in that distance without losing your care was the whole work. Not the clinical skill, the whole work. She nodded. Then she asked how I had stayed for 9 years without burning out. I thought about it honestly. I said I hadn't stayed because it was easy. I had stayed because the days when it mattered were frequent enough, and real enough, to make the days when it broke your heart bearable. I had stayed because this was where I was supposed to be, and I had known that from the beginning, even when other people hadn't known it for me. She said thank you. I said she didn't need to thank me. I meant it. On a Saturday in late April, I visited my parents for the first time since the ceremony. My mother made the meal I had grown up eating, something careful and familiar. My father had printed the hospital's Instagram post. He had actually printed it on regular printer paper and taped it to the refrigerator with a piece of painter's tape. He didn't point it out. He didn't say anything about it. It was just there, between a takeout menu and a photo of my nephew at a birthday party. I noticed it and didn't say anything either, but I stood in the kitchen longer than I needed to. My brother came for dinner with his family. The conversation stayed neutral for most of it: sports, weather, the kids' school schedules. Toward the end, my father asked me to explain the infection protocol to my aunt, who had apparently mentioned she was having a procedure done at a different hospital and was asking questions about standards of care. I explained it clearly and without making it simple. My father listened from across the table with the focused expression he used when he was taking something seriously. After dinner, my brother helped clear the table. We stood at the sink for a moment, side by side, and he said quietly, "I told Daniel Jr. that his aunt saves lives for a living." He said that's the coolest thing he's ever heard. I kept washing the dishes. I said, "Tell him thank you." The award still sits in my apartment on the shelf in my bedroom. Not in a drawer, not in a box. On the shelf, between a plant that needs more sunlight than it gets, and a photograph of my nursing school cohort on the day we passed our boards. I don't look at it every day. But when I do, I don't think about the empty chair at the ceremony. I think about the shift it represented, the late nights, the decisions made in rooms where the margin was thin. I think about the patients who were there for some of the hardest hours of their lives, and what it meant to be the person who knew what to do. I learned something in the months after that ceremony that I had been circling for years without being able to name. You cannot force people to understand the value of what you do. You cannot translate your worth into a language that someone has already decided not to learn. What you can do is keep showing up. Keep working at the level your work demands. Keep being consistent in the spaces where it matters most. And then, if you are patient, if you are honest, sometimes the world will do the translation for you. Not dramatically, not in a single moment, but slowly, in the way that real things shift. My family did not become different people. They adjusted. Imperfectly, incompletely, in the ways that they were capable of. That turned out to be more than I had expected, and less than the version of me from 10 years ago would have wanted. Both of those things are true at the same time. I stopped needing them to be the proof of my worth a long time ago. What surprised me was that once I had fully stopped needing it, something made space for something else. Something smaller and less dramatic than what I had spent years imagining. Something that felt, quietly, like enough. If you are listening to this and you recognize the shape of it, the work you have done that your family reduces to a summary, the invitations that go answered with good reasons for absence, the promotions you stopped announcing because the silence was worse than not saying anything, then I want you to hear this clearly. You do not need their understanding to be valid. You do not need their attendance to be real. The work you do in the spaces they have never entered is not diminished by the fact that they have never entered it. Keep going. Keep being consistent, and trust that eventually, the world will show up to say what the people closest to you could not. Sometimes that is the only ceremony that matters, and sometimes it is enough. If this resonated with you, leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from, or which part of this story felt closest to your own. These stories deserve to be told, and they deserve to be heard. If you want to keep listening, consider subscribing. We share stories like this one regularly, and we're just getting started.